Hey everyone, I'm Shannon Keebler with Empower Consulting, and we're going to talk about elapsed time. So I had someone ask on our Facebook user group page, so how do we conquer this whole third grade elapsed time issue? And I agree, it is probably one of the most difficult concepts that we teach our third graders. For whatever reason, they really struggle with it. So I'm going to show you a couple of ideas that you can use to help your kids with this. I know that in math expressions, if you're using the math expressions curriculum, they do have you use an open number line. So I'm going to show you the open number line, but I'm also going to show you a scaffold that could come before the open number line, and then an alternative method that I found has been very beneficial as well. So first and foremost, before I show you those examples, I want you to consider incorporating more choral counting about time into this unit. One of the issues we find is that kids just don't know how to count by time amounts, right? So I could say count by threes, they know that. I could say count by tens, they know that. But when I ask them to count by hours, if it's on the hour, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, most of us are okay, although I'd say definitely start there and make sure that when we start with AM, if we start at 12 AM, they stop, freeze, and they know to transition to 12 PM as a quarterly count. But then I'd ask you to start counting off hours. So just like we start counting off decade, if I'm in a younger grade classroom and I say count by tens and we never count off decade, they never really get good at counting by tens. If I were to say start at 13 and they start to recognize those patterns, 13, 23, 33, the same is true for time. So I think elapsed time would go much smoother if students had practice counting by time amounts. So maybe as they go from the carpet to the seats, they'll transition count. Maybe they go from their seats to the door for lunch, they'll transition count. Maybe you do it as a counting circle and you do it as a formal routine. And as you sit in the circle, each student says the next time, and then there's a scribe. So maybe the teacher's scribing the times up on the board so that you can have a conversation about the patterns that you see, because we do know that some students need that visual help to start seeing the patterns that we're saying, right? So if you incorporate that small routine, I think that you'll get a big return on your investment. So an example would be, well, let's start with hours, right? And then we would say, now let's start by counting by half hours. That would be the next big benchmark. And so we'd say, if we're starting at 1:30 p.m., start counting, and I want you to finish when we get to 1:30 a.m., right? So then we would say 1:30 p.m., 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, and then I want them to freeze because something's about to happen. And it's just like in the younger grades, we freeze when we do our tens and our ones. I want them to freeze because something's happening here. I'm at 11:30 and I want them to know, wait a minute, something is going to change that's significant. Think about it. And then I want them to continue. 12:30 p.m., 1:30 or a.m. I can't remember where we started. So either way, you get the point that I want them to freeze when there's something that's going to big that's happened. If we transition from a.m. to p.m., or freeze when you're transitioning from hours to minutes. That will also help. And then we can transition from counting by half hours to we could count by 15 minutes, or we count by hours again, but go off. So 1:07, 2:07, 3:07, 4:07, 5:07, and they'll start to see those patterns as well. Connect it back to the base 10 system. So as they start counting, they're going to get better at identifying how many jumps they need to take to go forward or to go backward amounts of time. But I think that this really is a counting issue. Our students need more practice counting by that number. So now let me show you a couple of ways to do this with a ruler, an open number line, and a T-chart. Okay, so let's give this a try. We are going to talk about 3 different strategies. So the first strategy is going to be that open number line. So if I try the open number line and I go from 1:30 and I end at 4:47, how much time is that? So on an open number line, we start with 1:30. Now, some students are tempted to go to the nearest hour because they feel like that might be the easiest way to count. It's easier to count by whole hours than on off hours. So what I mean is if they might go from 1:30 and they say, well, the closest hour is 2 o'clock. So I let them investigate this idea. And so that would be a hill because it's just minutes, and that's 30 minutes. But let's see the types of complications we run into when we do that type of work. So now I'm going to continue to count, and I go 2 o'clock. Now I'm going to keep counting without doing my hills and mountains up here to keep track of the time, because I find that some students forget how to continue to count, or they lose track of where they're going when they have to stop, etc. So I like to do one full step at a time. So I go 1:30 to 2, and now I can count by whole hours. 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and now I know I have to get to 4:47. So I can go a full 47 minutes, or I could do something easier and go to like 4:30 and then 4:45. But for time's sake, let's go ahead and stop at 4:47. So I'm going to now go back and count how I decided to jump for those numbers. So 1:30 to 2 was minutes, so that was 30 minutes. Then I have hours, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 4:47 were minutes, so I do a hill. I had 30 minutes, 1 hour, 1 hour, and then this was 47 minutes. But this is where I hope students would see that this is not maybe the most efficient method, because now I have 30 minutes and 47 minutes I have to add up. Well, I would hope most third graders could reason that that's 77 minutes, which is more than an hour, so it would be an hour and 17. But if you have students who are already struggling with this concept, adding in complicated computation or mental math may not be the smartest way to go about this skill. So they would experience this for themselves and see that adding up those numbers and remembering to make a new hour and regroup to a new hour may not be our most efficient strategy. So then you could show that there is another way that we wouldn't have to do that. If we started at 1:30, now I can count by hours. Let's see, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30, 4:30. I'm almost to 4:47. I'd go from 4:30, I could go 4:40, and then 4:47. If you have a lot of students who are still at that counting on stage, then they might have to go 4:40, 4:41, 4:42, 4:43. So students should be able to see that they have that option. Not all students see how they can jump from 4:30 to 4:40 or 4:30 to 4:47. So you may have to step that out even more and make it okay if they want to make smaller jumps. So now let's go back and count to see what we did. We did 1:30 to 2:30. There's an hour. It gets a mountain. 2:30 to 3:30. 3:30 to 4:30. Now I'm going minutes, so I get hill, hill. So let's count what we did. We have 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. I have 10 minutes, 7 minutes. You can now see I have 3 hours, 7 minutes, and there wasn't any regrouping to a new hour. So this might be more efficient for many students. But let's look at an alternative method. And so let's now look at the T-chart. In expressions, they don't do a lot of work with open number lines. So there's a little bit of work that happens in second grade to start. But if your students aren't familiar with the number line, when they start to use the number line in third grade for elapsed time, some students are still figuring out how that particular model works, and they're also trying to take on elapsed time, which proves to be a bit difficult. So if your students are struggling with the open number line, the T-chart might be a better way to start. So if I say I have to start at 3:30, I have to end at 4:47, and this is going to be where I log my time. So now I know I can count by hours. I can go from 1:30 to 2:30, 2:30 to 3:30, 3:30 to 4:30, and 4:30 to, let's say, count on 4:40, 4:47. I'll just make those smaller jumps for now. So 2:30 to 3:30, or excuse me, 1:30 to 2:30 is 1 hour. 2:30 to 3:30 was an hour. 3:30 to 4:30, another hour. 4:30 to 4:40, 10 minutes. And 4:40 to 4:47 is 7 minutes. So another way students might need to do it is they might need to record as they go, because they might count this as a double step. So when they go 1:30 to 2:30, they may do what I did and they actually go 2:30 to 3:30 and they forget their original move was from 1:30 to 2:30. So they might start here instead and do 1:30 to 2:30, log an hour. 2:30 to 3:30, log an hour. So I think it just depends on whether or not students have a hard time keeping track of the hours and counting and skip counting. If you're doing a lot of that choral counting, this shouldn't be an issue and they should be able to just log it as they move. And then I go 4:30 and I capture an hour. So if I continued that process, the T-chart would work for those friends as well. So let's look at one final method. So one final method might be to use a time ruler. So this happens specifically in the math expressions. They have a ruler and they say, what happens if I were to fold this and put it in a circle? You can see how it looks similar to a clock. So if I had a ruler that goes from 1 to 12 and I made it on paper and I folded it, it could go into a clock shape. So time is a form of measurement. That's a visual we want students to have. So if I were to take that piece of paper and lay it back out flat, it looks like a ruler. Now, this particular example, there would be 2 rulers because I go through 12 o'clock twice. So this visual is nice for that AM and PM, especially if we have to transition elapsed time over that noon mark or over that midnight mark. This might help students see it. Another thing this particular visual helps students with is if they don't have magnitude comparison. If they can't really tell you where those times fall on a number line, then this would be a nice visual for them. So sometimes we assume that students can see that number line and the open number line is still too abstract for those kids. So if you need to take a step back and scaffold for certain students, this would be a nice tool to do that. So I would say if they have this particular ruler, and I just got this from Pinterest, I actually just searched for it, and then you can see here that it's on worksheetfun.com. And I would have my pen and I'd say, well, clap when we get to 1:30 p.m. because that's often one of the difficulties for students is they don't even know where that number lies on the number line or on the clock. So as I go, I would want them to see my cursor, see my pen, and then I want them to clap when I get halfway between 1:30 and 2. It's just another visual, another way for students to see it. So then I would have them mark and count 1:30, 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, and now put a dot where about 4:47 would be, and it would be about right here. Now they can count their moves. 1:30 to 2:30, 2:30 to 3:30, 3:30 to 4:30, and a hill for the minutes. 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, and then I'm at 4:30, 17 minutes. Or they could do smaller jumps if they need to. So you would make this a larger ruler if you needed more space to show tiny jumps. But this visual might help those students who don't know what number comes next, or they need to see that grand scale so they can count their steps. I hope this was a helpful video for you and that you'll like and subscribe to our channel as we show more videos on specific math concepts. Thanks for watching, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Go be great.